Okay, thanks to David and Angela for the kind introductory words. And the first talk of the first session is being held by Anne-Lise Giraud from University of Genève. And she will talk about speech processing and auditory cortex with and without oscillations.
Well, it's super nice to be here. Thanks for organizing this. I've never talked in front of an audience where I can feel so many friends. You know, it's like a family. It's very nice.
We're still friends now.
No. Yeah, no, but I know the spirit, you know. Even if we talk rubbish, they stay friends. That's the point. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my own obsession, which is to try to understand what computation oscillations can do, or whether they don't do anything and they are just the fumes. So this is my own obsession, and most of what I'm going to talk today is about models that we are trying to modeling works we are trying to do in my lab. So I say trying because it's very complicated. Maybe it's going to be, you know, there are no answers. It's just efforts. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So first of all, I want to acknowledge these people who are the people who did the job. And especially, I mean, Luc is in the audience. You look younger, Luc, on this picture. We need an update. Yes, I mean, young and less young people. Okay, so speech is a special biological signal because it's a signal produced by our own brain. It's produced by our motor system, by the periodicity of the motor system, by the turbulences that are going on in the vocal apparatus, and this results in a quasi-periodic signal. And because the brain also has some periodic type of activity, the idea we worked on for the last 10 years now is this potential specific interaction that can happen between the rhythmicity of speech and the rhythmicity of the brain signals. Voila. Okay, so when you look into the human brain in the auditory cortex and with intracortical EEG at rest, you can see that there is some structure in the activity. So these oscillations seem to be present at rest, and of course their structure changes when speech enters in the system. And that's what we want to study. So I like this slide, although I think Benjamin did it. Where is Benjamin? And we all agree that it's completely junk, actually, but I use it because I find it very didactic. I would like someone to reproduce this. So when we try to cross-correlate speech with the brain response in auditory cortex, we actually see that there is this interaction, this sort of resonance in three big domains, in the theta, in the low beta, and in the gamma domain. And I like this slide because it tells us that at the onset of speech, you have this theta and gamma interaction, but that the low beta interaction is sort of delayed, which for me was matter for thinking about beta involved in this in predictions that take place, you know, after the system has looped at least once. Okay, so the hypothesis that these oscillation domains reflect specific and important computations, this is what the big question we are after. Okay, so as you know, oscillations take place in specific regions of the cortex, of the cortical column, in superficial and deep layers. And with David, we tried to hypothesize a few things that are wrong. I mean, we know that, but that help us progress and think. At the time, we thought that we have to conceptualize these theta and gamma oscillations that are involved in bottom-up speech processing as some machinery that is localized in superficial layers, and so the signal enters layer 4 and then is somehow processed in superficial layers and goes out of it in a more structured way. And especially with alternation of coding periods and some more latent or silent periods that are important for decoding. And Oded's work actually informs us a lot about the importance of that decoding time. Well, in more detail, this is what we proposed, which again is becoming more and more wrong, but it was useful. So we thought that when there is this train of spiking in the layer 4 of the auditory cortex with a big onset activity, it's going to reset theta and gamma oscillations that are inherently present, and this reset actually structures them and nests them. And ideally, if things are, well, ideal, there should be some alignment between the excitability phases with the moments of speech where there is something important to code, basically the onset of syllables. But this scale, the theta, is the scale that is important for syllable parsing, and this scale, the gamma scale, is important for phoneme encoding. Again, these are hypotheses. And this silent period could be important conceptually for top-down prediction to exert themselves and interfere with, interact with the process, the perception process. So this model actually emphasized the importance of nesting, of coupling between theta and gamma oscillations, and recently, with Alexia Phil, we proposed this view that connects architectures with function. And in the speech domain, we are in this situation where we have gamma and theta oscillators that are both that have a common input with speech, and then we have this nesting that is highly driven by the stimulus itself. For other cognitive functions of oscillations, the same kind of coupling between low and fast oscillation could come from a totally different architecture. So we cannot really totally generalize from what's going on in the hippocampus to what we have in speech. Okay, so basic observations with intercortical EEG. This is what we get from the auditory cortex. So this guy has an electrode here. When the guy hears a sentence, then you have a structured activity with a gamma and theta activity. If you go to a more associative region, then you see that the profile is completely different. And if you cross-correlate speech with this activity, you see that the cross-correlation is mostly here in the theta and gamma frequencies for early auditory regions, whereas here, this gamma activity doesn't find a counterpart in the speech signal. So this is really endogenous thing. And the beta actually is more cross-correlating and resonating. If you look, we can see also that the cross-frequency coupling profile is very different in these regions. And there is something to understand from that, but to me, this is very complicated to make sense of these electrophysiological data. And of course, we can do clever designs and everything, but being an impatient person, I thought that what we should do is go to computational modeling and really try to find out, by building models, what oscillations can do to the speech signal. So the aim was to explore a potential causal role of oscillations in speech processing, and the first approach was to model biologically plausible oscillations, not simply, oscillators, but something that has the potential to be realistic. And we did it this way. We built, a model with 2 oscillators with neurons that have some realism, which are leaky, integrate, and fire neurons. We have a whole bunch of gamma excitatory neurons, inhibitory neurons, theta excitatory, inhibitory, and importantly, we couple the 2 systems, the 2 oscillating networks together to produce this nesting. Voila. And this is what we get. So what we measure, what we want to measure is the output of the excitatory gamma neurons. So this is what we have. So each point here is the activity from 1 neuron. We have like 100 of gamma neuron and less from the theta network. And you see that at rest we have spontaneous gamma activity, spontaneous theta. But when speech kicks in, everything gets more structured. The theta activity becomes clear, and then the gamma becomes informative. We wanted to first assess whether a theta oscillator built that way with some biological plausibility could really play a role in speech segmentation, syllable segmentation. So we compared actually the model, which is what we call a PINF, in comparison with the ping for gamma, with some models that are more simple, just a simple acoustic boundary detector. And also we compared it with a state-of-the-art algorithm for syllabification, which is the Mermelstein algorithm, which works offline. And when we compared, we found out that the theta oscillator is actually the one that does the best. So that was cool. I mean, the interest of this is that it works online, whereas this Mermelstein algorithm works only offline. If you compare what the theta oscillator does in comparison with human listeners, you see that it's pretty good. So it was good, and a guy actually from automatic speech recognition domain came to us, and said, okay, I would like to try this in a more engineering way. And actually, he worked with Alex Yafil, and they concluded that it does better than anything else. So I show this because really it also tells us that our work is not totally useless and can be, have some impact at the engineering level. Okay, so as I said, what we wanted to, so this was about theta, now I'm going to talk about gamma. We wanted to actually see what's coming out of the gamma excitatory neurons and whether this could encode the content of syllables. So we actually decoded this activity with a classifier. And we used different codes and different networks to compare. So we used simple code where we take simply the count of the spike within a theta cycle, and another more complicated code where we take into account the phase. We label the spikes by the different phases of the theta cycle, which we call the phase partition code. We also compared different variants of our model, the intact version, but also a version where theta and gamma are uncoupled, because we want to see whether the coupling is important, and also a version where the theta is not driven by the speech input, meaning that you have an ongoing theta, but so it might help, but it's not, it's not receptive to the stimulus, to the syllable boundaries. And this is what we get. So this is the decoding we have. So you see the variations we have that are really tiny. So the good news is that we reached about 60% of syllable recognition with the intact model using the spike pattern, so using the phase of theta activity to label the gamma content. And the other versions, so either spike count and also all the versions worked less, but you see the difference is really minimum. So, I mean, it's kind of so-so results, but still informative and perhaps encouraging. Okay, so theta oscillations can segment speech by signaling online syllable acoustic boundaries. Gamma oscillations can provide a code for phonemic encoding. And gamma activity is better decoded when spiking is informed by the phase of theta activity. I think we are safe with these conclusions. Okay, so now we know that the human speech system is resilient to speech compression. So there are fast speakers and slow speakers, and our brain can cope with this within certain limits. And we know that if we compress by 3, we start losing comprehension. So we looked at the performance of the model depending on compression, and we saw some resilience when we compress by 2 and even by 3. But you know, the human performance would rather be like this. So we're far from being realistic here. Okay, so an important notion that is missing from this model, I mean, I think it was clear to you that the model was just a bottom-up model. So no notion of top-down. And we thought that a big thing that is missing is the notion of top-down. Of course, there are many other things that are missing that could contribute to the difference in this behavior. But now we explore the top-down aspect in this. To sort of have a notion where we are heading to, we did this very simple experiment. So it was Maria and Luc who did this. We had people listen to speech and compressed speech with EEG. Can't be more simple than that. There was first a behavioral experiment where we could really quote the comprehension in a precise way, and during the EEG experiment, we just asked the subject to rate themselves subjectively their comprehension, and we got similar results. So we thought that we can go on with the behavior we have during the EEG experiment. So first, we wanted to have a notion of syllable rate tracking by the theta range activity. And here we use 2 approaches. So in both cases, it's speech EEG cross-correlation, the basic notion, either with shared power or with phase locking. So here, what you see is that, so this is compression by 1, 2, and 3. So the blue line here is above the 2 others. Here, the red line is above the 2 others, and here the purple line is above the 2 others, meaning that we see some displacement of the theta rhythm to track the syllable rhythm. What is important is to see that it crosses this, how did you call it, this alpha, the slice, so that it goes past the alpha rhythm. So I don't think that here the 10 Hertz activity can be conceptualized in terms of alpha. It is alpha, strictly speaking, but here we see that it displaces, so it's not alpha. This is rather a theta that's moving. The important thing to note here for ODED, especially ODED, is that we go beyond 9 Hertz. So ODED, maybe you're going to talk about that. ODED has this notion that 9 Hertz is a limit for the theta rhythm, is the capacity of the theta rhythm to segment into syllables. And here we tend to see something else. And again, I mean, this gives us the same sort of results that 9 Hertz is not a limit, and that theta is not limitant in terms of comprehension. Because I remind you that for a compression factor of 3, comprehension drops, but theta does not. So we did a GLM analysis where we tried to dissociate syllable rate and syllable rate tracking and comprehension. So we had two regressors that were sort of orthogonal. And here, that's what we get with the mean, with the syllable rate factor. These are all the electrodes, and here we see something in the theta range and something in the gamma range in opposite direction. This is power, this is not phase. And both are significant. So actually, if we just look at the stimulus-driven neural activity, we see these two frequencies that we think are involved in bottom-up processing. So this confirms really what we thought. And if we look at comprehension, so this regressor, then we see big activity in the beta range. This is also significant. So here we know what we have to deal with. So theta and gamma for bottom-up and beta for top-down. Probably comprehension, maybe top-down. So theta and gamma power are sensitive to syllable rate. Theta follows syllable rate, but the quality of gamma encoding decreases, and beta power signals drives speed comprehension. I skip this one because I'm gonna. I don't have a lot of time. Okay, so this gammaup betadown scheme had been hypothesized before by Wang in 2010 and confirmed experimentally by many some people in this room actually, and also by us. And I'm going to show you our little side of the story, the quick and dirty study that we did that also leads us to this conclusion. So again, this guy with the electrode in auditory cortex. And what we assessed here, so it was just listening to a sentence. We did two types of analysis. One was directional nesting. So we asked what does the phase of low frequency activity in a region in association cortex modulates the power in the high frequency domain in the lower area, in an area that is hierarchically below. So that's what we have here. And in the bottom-up direction, we have things in the theta range. In the top-down direction, we have things in the alpha, beta range. We couple that with Granger causality because this directional nesting doesn't really give us an idea of directionality. If we couple that with Granger causality and we look at the overlap, so there is the overlap for bottom-up in theta, 5 minutes, thanks, and the overlap for the top-down in the, sort of beta range. Okay, so this confirms what I just said. Another interesting and I find super important result that we get was to find out whether this upgoing gamma, downgoing beta was sort of simultaneous, or whether it was an alternation of bottom-up and top-down. And looking at this kind of plot, it seems obvious that it's actually alternating. And we did some more analysis, and we found an alternation rate, sort of in the theta range. Is this too slow? Is this true? I mean, I hope we can have more information in the future about that. Is this too slow? I think it's slower than what Nancy proposed. Nancy, are you still the only one saying things about that? I mean, I find the notion really, really super interesting and important. Anyway, so we'll know in the future what's this alternation rate. Okay, so how to incorporate the notion of betadown in speech processing models? This is the question we ask in the lab. Is there an advantage of having alternating bottom-up and top-down flows? Can we relate gammaup betadown notions to the notion of prediction and prediction errors? You know, because this is a purely physiological scheme, but if you listen to people like Carl Friston, you should find a way to connect the two worlds and see, you know, whether you have the downgoing flow is actually a predictive flow, and the feed-forward flow flow of prediction errors. This is really still a big field of research for the future. I skip this. Okay, and I just want to. I have 2 minutes. 3? Wow. Okay, so we think that there are two, at least, possible approaches. One would be to create realistic oscillation models, the same kind as I showed you before, with spiking neurons. But it's going to be very difficult because we need, if we want to do that, we need several stages. We need auditory cortex plus a stage where there is integration, a word level or a syllable level. So it's going to be difficult. Or we go for a predictive coding model with idealized oscillation, which is an easier way. And I just want to show you a few slides about this work. So this is a work that's done currently by Sevada, Hovsepian, and Itsasola Sagasti. So this model has an input level where from speech there are two things that are extracted, the envelope and the spectrogram. We have a theta oscillator, but not the biophysical type, really some really stupid theta oscillator that tracks the envelope. And when the envelope reaches a certain threshold, then it starts the activity of timing units. And these timing units have a time constant of 25 milliseconds, which is our way to emulate the gamma activity. So there is no gamma oscillation in this model. It's just gamma by means of integration on the scale of 25 milliseconds. So with this series of timing units, there is encoding of syllables. And there is connection with a syllable pool, which we call the content level, where each unit corresponds to a learned spectrotemporal pattern. So each unit is described by its activity level, which continuously varies during the inference process. And this is, I show you how it works. So here we have syllable 2 that presents itself. So syllable 2. So here there is the model is sort of at rest, and then there is a hesitation between syllable 2 and syllable 4. And by iteration and predictions and prediction errors, then syllable 2 wins at the end. So just to show you to have a sense of the performance of the model, of the behavior of the model, this is a sentence we try to decode. The equipment needs proper maintenance, and I'm going to show you for these 3 syllables what's going on. So here, for needs, you see the blue at the end wins, so it's a correct recognition. Pro, you see the red winning at the end, it's correct. And here, you have at the end something that is more yellow, and it doesn't work. And this is a version of the model where we remove the theta oscillator. If we leave the theta oscillations, then we have something that works well. So this is another way to probe the role of these oscillations. Just more quantitative results. We see that the model with oscillation gives less prediction errors than without oscillations. Okay, so next step for this work is actually to implement more oscillations. So at the moment, oscillations are only emulated by timing process at specific model stages. there is a continuous flow of top-down and bottom-up information. So the way the model is implemented really is a constant, flow, up and down. So what we want to do in the next step is to actually have a flow that has a temporal structure that is itself oscillating, because we want to know whether there is a real function for predictions to be actually sent down on a beta scale. And we're going to play with that to find out what's the optimum. Voilà. I think that's all. So maybe I just go through this. The remaining important issues for us are how to relate neural oscillations with the notions of predictive coding and prediction, predictions and prediction errors. Are predictions and prediction errors explicitly computed? At what scale? So this is a topic that interests us with Nancy. How do beta and theta gamma oscillations physically interact? That's also something I would like to have a sense of with computation work. And does a neural beta activity convey information content predictions, or it's just a routing tool? Voila. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, so thanks, Anne-Lise. I'm sure there are many questions. So where's the microphone? Ah, okay. So you want to go around? No questions?
Nancy.
You have your own microphone. You just push the button in front of you and then...
Thank you for a really good talk. This is more of a comment than it is a question, but it's about a discussion about all of this. You were making a distinction between biophysically realistic models and more phenomenological models. And I just wanted to make things still more difficult.
I know.
That is, it's true that the biophysical models are more difficult to deal with, but an essential point about them is that they can be made in very many ways. So that a theta oscillation, for example, can come about as interactions with inhibitory cells, which is the kind that you were talking about, but also single-cell oscillators can be theta oscillations. And those different kinds of biophysically detailed descriptions of oscillators can have immensely different properties with respect to what happens when you try to entrain them, or when they interact with other kinds of rhythms like gamma rhythms. So to add to your list of remaining important issues, one really has to understand the biophysical nature of the oscillations in order to ask the kinds of questions that I agree are really important.
I completely agree. I mean, really, this is a clumsy attempt that we did. But, I mean, I wish we could do more. Well, actually, if you saw what I proposed to Alexia Phil initially as a model, that was something that came from more detail, but that was simply not possible for the people I had. But I think this is super important to go in this direction, super important. So, yeah, maybe in your lab, Nancy. Yeah.
With help.
No questions. I have one. So I thought it was super interesting, the model that you presented with the needs proper, the second one. But I was actually at the same time wondering, how do you think the words get put together, right? Because here you showed us how you decode every syllable, right? But proper needs to somehow put together these two.
Yeah.
So do you have any,
It's another follow-up, actually, is to have a word level. But I'm not even sure we would answer, well, no, because, I mean, it wouldn't solve the problem, but we need to have a concept about what brings syllables together, which is beyond my... the scope of my what I can do in my lifetime, I don't think I will have time to go beyond this stage, actually. But, I mean, delta can be something we have to think about in this context. But, yeah, I mean, yeah.
I mean, the specific question in that case is how do you think then, say, lower oscillations would interact
Can you...
how do you think its lower oscillations would interact with beta, for instance? Because in your model, beta was carrying the prediction, right? So it was doing the heavy lifting. In a way, I imagine that where you're going is that you would be putting, by the time you hear pro, you would have some ideas of what you would hear next. So how would the
So I mean,
prediction
now we seem to come to the idea that delta and beta maybe work together in a predictive context. Do we? I mean, last time in Frankfurt last year, I think it was one of our conclusions, and I was happy to see that on your slides it was the same color for delta and beta. So I think this idea is sort of spreading, but we have to demonstrate still, no? I mean, maybe there will be some demonstration. But I mean, that does not answer your question, I'm afraid, Lucia. We can discuss.
It's all right.
Uded.
So, I don't know if you noticed, but during her talk, Anne-Lise waved no with the finger when she talked about Maria's talk, because I was looking at my computer and she was upset that I'm not listening. But I was listening, and I looked there because I wanted to share with you some discussions I had with Maria about this, I think, very interesting observation they had, that theta oscillations went beyond 9 hertz, which is the capacity, and yet you had, intelligibility dropped. So this is the kind of, and the thing that we came up with after discussing it, that's what I want to share with you, is that if you look at Nursky's data, ECOG and looking at response to speech, the theta appears at the core level. And the question is whether tempo, the model and the idea that there is a phase lock loop, a structure that traces the syllabic rate, maybe it appears after the core.
Yes, but if this is, I mean, in this case, you have to take into account other things than theta, than just theta. You have to take into account other gamma and beta, I think. And the capacity, I think, that we have to focus on now is the gamma capacity.
Well, I think, that you don't need to have beta in that level, and you can show insensitivity to time compression without top-down, just by bottom-up. And the big question is, how come that in your measurements, theta goes beyond the 9 hertz and intelligibility drops at 9 hertz?
So that's going to be a long discussion that maybe we pursue here and at Biophysical, next Biophysical. Pascal has a question.
It's more a comment on this, because if I understand Anne-Lise correctly, then the idea is that within a theta cycle, right, there is basically a negotiation taking place where multiple gamma cycles are needed and multiple beta cycles are needed to basically negotiate an interpretation, to settle on an interpretation, right? So I could imagine that theta is basically in training to a certain degree, but if you don't fit enough gamma and beta cycles into it, a sufficient number of bottom-up and top-down cycles, you don't with a sufficient fidelity, settle on an interpretation of a syllable. And so you do have some entrainment of theta, but your intelligibility will go down. Isn't that a plausible concept?
I think Oded bases his conviction on the fact that he used stimuli that were non-predictable, that were meaningless. But still, I mean, digits, or even, I mean, there are still, enough. I think there is still enough meaning for at least considering the possibility that that you're right.
I would like to return to this point after my talk, because I addressed it during the talk, and I don't want to take time here on this.
Could I just add one comment to this? Because I think if this is exactly the case, that there is basically a multiple loops of this are necessary to settle on the correct syllable, then I think it's not a question about whether there is information content in the top-down beta or whether it's just a routing tool, because if there is basically multiple alternative interpretations in a lower area that are basically competing for being signaled bottom-up, and the top-down prediction gives more weight to one of them, then in one and the same instance, the top-down beta is conveying some sort of content, and by giving a routing, a biased routing, a priority routing to one of the gamma encoded oscillators, it thereby is also a routing tool, so it's the same thing. Right?
Exactly. So I think routing is one aspect, and time is the other aspect. You know, integration time, and that is information in a way, and this is precisely what we want to play with the model I presented last. You know, I really want to have a notion of what information is provided by the time scale of beta. Why beta at this time scale? Because it's not any beta. This is a beta that is really like around 14 hertz. You know, and we find it always at that frequency. Why this frequency? Why, computationally, why is it important? Okay.
So, yes, I was wondering whether you think about the beta as encoding statistical structure, like, for example, the transitions between phonemes that you can, so if the theta entrains at syllabic level, then there is the possibility of, looking into the statistics within the syllable, and then deciding where to go left or right based on the transitional probabilities?
I have no clue. I mean, statistics, you mean online statistics?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I haven't thought about it, but I would say no until my spontaneous reaction is no. But maybe you're right. Yes, Simon.
So, final question.
I don't know whether I'm the only one who's puzzled here, but I found your experiment super interesting with the compressed speech. But I'm a bit puzzled that you can call this still theta when it's a totally different frequency. So, I mean, I appreciate it's subserving a similar function as in the separation of speech things that I don't know anything about. But maybe you're entraining a total different network, a total different, neural circuit, and it's trying to do the same job that theta is doing usually, and it just does not such a good job at it. But in that case, it wouldn't be theta at 14 hertz.
So are you?
Does it make sense?
You're talking about theta versus like alpha, for instance?
Yeah. So, for instance, if I make an analogy like training the visual system, right? And we just flicker stimuli, then we wouldn't think about one rhythm that we're driving at different frequencies, but we would think of different frequencies. So
no, that's why I think we try to make this distinction or this point in the paper that we call it theta. I mean, we shouldn't call it theta, but like tracking rhythm, speech tracking rhythm. Yeah. But I think this is important to accept that this is not alpha in the sense of what the alpha does usually.
Yeah, I guess my point is, say for instance, you have particular neurons, right, that usually have different time constants and stuff, and they usually track the syllables at a particular rate, and that would give you the theta, and that's what they do in the natural case, and they're really good at it, and that's why speech works very good at this frequency. And then you entrain in a whole different frequency, so these neurons, they fall out, they can't follow at this rate, or just at any, other odd sample or something, and then you're driving a completely different network. You still get you still can measure this entrainment signature with EEG, but it's like a total different thing.
Could be, but what we have is in a selection of auditory electrodes. So a totally different network would have a different.
Yeah, sure, but
spatial.
with one electrode you measure like a whole ton.
Well, this is a good point. I mean, this is surely an important point, which would need to be addressed with intracortical EEG.
Maybe we can continue this point later. And now let's thank Anne-Lise again and move on to the next speaker.